Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We have the pleasure of having a couple of our Innovia team members with us. Barbara Gillette and Trish Bakuti will be presenting on best practices using changelog. And as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and it will be posted to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And you can find our library under our resources tab on our website at innovia.com. And we do encourage you to ask questions during our presentation. So please feel free to type those into the questions box and we will answer them at the end of our session. So now I'm going to turn it over to Trish and Barbara, and they're going to kick off the presentation.
Thanks, Angie.
Thank you, Angie. Hello, everyone. Glad that you're able to join us today. We really appreciate you being here. Today's workshop, you'll learn the best practices for using the changelog. My name is Barbara Gillette, and I'm a senior application consultant here at Innovia. And I've had the pleasure of working with the NAV in the NAV BC space for more than 10 years. My primary background has been in IT and quality management systems, so the changelog is very near and dear to my heart. I look forward to spending time with you today and share what I know. So at this point, I'm going to let Trish introduce herself.
Thanks, Barbara. My name is Trish Bakuti. I'm a customer engagement specialist here at Innovia. I've been in the space for about 12 years. I started out working for the user groups. I then worked for an ISV and did a lot with security and controls and all the different Dynamics products. So another topic like Barbara that's near and dear to my heart is this changelog and using audit trails. So I look forward to sharing this session with you all today. So this is just a quick overview of our agenda. I'll let you all read it, but high level is what we're going to go through. So first on the list is how to determine what to audit. So Barbara, if you want to change the slide. So you've decided that you do want to start putting some controls in place and you want to use the changelog. What are you going to audit? So the first thing is, what do you track? Let's start with, please do not track everything. We'll talk about it a little later, but that would be a huge performance impact hit to your system, and it's just not a best practice. So let's think about what is important to your company, right? You want to really take a risk-based approach and only track the things that would be a high risk to your company. So for instance, you don't want to track fax numbers, right? When's the last time you sent a fax? Probably 1997. So no need to track that field. But maybe you do care about if someone changes the payment terms or a discount or, something in the master data that's important to you, right? So really get with your team and think about the important fields that should be tracked. Another important factor is segregation of duties, right? Someone shouldn't be able to perform two sides of a financial transaction, but sometimes you're small and you can't help it, right? So, for instance, if someone on your accounting team can create a vendor and pay a vendor, that's a risk. There's a lot of risk for fraud there, but there might be specific fields around that you want to track as a control to make sure that nothing bad is happening. Sometimes you might have outside controls in place. Maybe if you use positive pay, that would mean you don't have to track some fields regarding payments because you're using positive pay with the bank. So kind of walk through the different controls that you guys already have in place. And really look for the high dollar impact, right? What fields in your system that someone can make changes could provide, a financial impact to your company. Those are the ones you really want to look out for and track. If you're audited, maybe you're publicly traded, you're a nonprofit, or whatever the case, you go through financial audits, you want to maybe chat with your auditors as well. They might have some specific requirements of things that they're expecting you to track. So work with them to make sure that you're tracking what they seem necessary. And then another thing is, if you don't plan on reviewing it, don't track it, right? We'll talk about this in a little bit, but every change that you're tracking takes up space in the database. So if you're not going to look at it, don't bother tracking it. You don't want to have to pay for extra space because you're tracking things that don't matter to your company. And then in the beginning, you might want to start small. Just think about like the few key things that you should be tracking and then add on gradually as you see the need. Again, tracking too many things can be a performance impact, so we want to limit it to the things that are really higher risk. So some other best practices, I think I mentioned it before, right? But really pay attention to what's risk for your company. You want to take a risk-based approach and really look through the things that could really do financial harm if you're not watching them. And you really want to find the right balance between too much information and too little information, right? You don't want to weed through thousands of records to find specific changes. So again, work with the teams, work with the people responsible for those business processes to understand what you should be tracking. And you probably want to create a data retention policy, right? So do you need to keep this data for 6 months, 3 months, 12 months, whatever your team feels appropriate? Because as I mentioned again, as you track the data, it's creating a table with a lot more data. And if you keep this data for 3 years, that's a huge amount of storage space, right? So discuss with your team what you feel like the best data retention policy is, and then set it and follow through with it. And then we kind of talked about tracking the critical data points, right? So you want to track at the field level. You don't want to say, I want to track everything on the customer card. That's definitely not all the information that anybody would need to track. So look at the specific field. Again, this reduces the performance impact, your data storage requirements, and it'll also help the reports run faster the less data you have in there, and it'll help your reviewers be a lot more accurate when they're actually looking at the data. And then also, I would suggest when you decide that you're going to do this, start out in your test database and start it there just for a day or two, just to check out the performance impact, go in and make some changes, see what you're capturing, that type of thing. It's always best to start out in test before you do anything in production. So you've decided to track your data, you're tracking your data, what do you do next, right? The first thing you want to do is make sure that the people that own the different business processes are the ones reviewing the data. You don't want to ask the guy or girl in IT to review all the changes, right? They're not familiar with all the business processes in your organization. So you want to make sure the right people are looking at the change log report relevant to their roles. And make sure people are reviewing it, right? I remember at my last company, FastPass, we had a customer who was tracking all the data and no one reviewed it. Unfortunately, they had some fraud happen. And the worst part was they had visibility to all of it. They just actually never looked at their audit trail reports, right? So someone needs to be looking at the data. And they really need to do it in a timely fashion, right? So if there's something that you're tracking that can really affect your financial exposure, maybe you want to review that every week. But maybe there's other things that don't matter as much, maybe changes to general ledger accounts that you might want to review on a monthly basis. So you need to decide with your team what is the best review policy and timeline for your team. And quite honestly, I would ask your team to sign off and say that they've reviewed it, right? Because it's easy to just say, oh yeah, I'll look at that later, and then things come up and it never gets reviewed. So if you can also create some sort of sign-off process that someone says, yes, I reviewed this month's change log report, that's an even better best practice. And then, looking at the who, what, and when, I always say the when is important. Change log captures timestamps. And if someone's making a change on St. Patrick's Day at 3 a.m., it's probably something you want to look at. Most of us are out there maybe drinking some green beer. And you shouldn't really be making system changes for the most part at odd hours. So that's another good thing to review when you are reviewing the data is the timestamps. Is it during the week? Is it on a weekend? Is it in the middle of the night? That type of thing. So I've said this a couple times, but I want to say it one more time. You do not want to audit everything, right? That's scary. That'll slow down your system. and no one will actually be able to review the data if you're tracking everything. So that's pitfall number one. Number two, these audit trail reports are to be used as a detective
Apologize for the
control.
report slides there. It's wanting to jump forward on jump ahead on its own. So I'm trying to keep doing that. So.
All right, Barbara's making sure everyone's paying attention.
Adding some fun to it.
That's right. I love it. So you don't want to use your audit trail reports as a substitute for different financial reporting, right? We have Power BI, you have native reports in Business Central. There's plenty of other ways to do financial reporting, but definitely just use this as a detective control to find different information in your system. And again, we talked about it a little bit, but asking someone to review a report that has 500 lines is way more efficient than asking someone to review 1 million lines of data. You don't want to create all these haystacks of data and then people will just say, oh yeah, I reviewed it. And they really didn't, because let's be honest, nobody can really probably efficiently review 1 million lines of data. So keeping it short and sweet and to the point will make your reviews much easier. All right, we're going to move on to the next slide, Barbara. So
I think we're ready to move on to the next slide.
All right, I know. I'm like, oh my gosh. So today all this stuff I've talked about is relative to the native changelog, which is in NAV and Business Central. There's some great opportunities with Power BI that Barbara will show you later that you can report off of the changelog just to make that data easier to use. There are third-party tools available as well. If the first two aren't working for you, the Enovia customer engagement team can help you look at third-party tools for an audit trail as well. So Barbara, I'll hand it off to you for the rest of the slides.
Okay. So the changelog itself tracks user, date, time, old and new values for changes. And we're going to jump into the demo here in a little bit and we'll get some hands-on with what that's really going to look like. You'll have some limitations for performance considerations and lack of flexibility in reporting within the changelog itself. And again, we'll see that here in just a little bit. But it is good for maintaining and auditing data. Tracking some of the changes. You'll need to activate the changelog. You'll select specific tables and fields that you want to track. You can choose them by company, but you'll want to take into consideration some of the performance issues because as Trish had mentioned earlier, if you got somebody tracking 1 million rows that you don't need to track, it's only going to, we've all watched it sit and spin, waiting for it to populate or to filter. So if we're tracking a bunch of information we don't need to track, we're going to create some performance issues. The changelog only tracks the changes that are made inside Business Central or NAV. And the changes are at the database level and they're about the table data itself. And then the reporting on the audit trail, as Trish mentioned, we'll be showing you some of that stuff here in just a little bit. These are the actual screens. This is what you'll see in Business Central, the two that you're basically going to be working on. You'll start up with the changelog setup. You'll turn it on. You go into setup and we'll be doing some work with fields and tables. When we click on this, we'll then see this screen. We are going to get into the demo, but I wanted you to have this as part of the PowerPoint. So if you do download it, you do have some, visuals to go along with that. This is what we're not recommending. So when you do all fields, and you'll see here in a little bit why that is, within NAV or Business Central, you have a lot of tables and a lot of fields. And to track unnecessary fields is where most people get into trouble with resource problems and slowing down their systems, and it doesn't become user friendly. It gets a little bit out of control. This is what it looks like in NAV. So this is actually screenshots for NAV 2016. You'll notice that they look very similar. You'll have an Actions tab, but you'll still get the tables for the setup. You have a checkbox for the action to activate the log. And then similarly, you'll go and pick your table, choose some fields, and again, we want to avoid this all fields. The entries themselves, this is what it looks like in Business Central. So you have several different columns here. It tracks the date and time. This is the date and time that the transaction happened. But it gets compounded because you have, if you're tracking 100 fields within one table and a change is made, it may put in 100 lines, and that's where it kind of bogs you down a little bit on the resources. If you don't need to track it, then you shouldn't select it, even though selecting all fields should be easy. And then you'll also see that there's some fields here that'll show you what the old value was and what it was changed to. There's two sets of columns here. One of them says local. This is, if you're familiar with the sales order, you have a release. When you release a sales order, the actual value in Business Central is a number. It could be 0 through 3, but the actual value might be released, open, pending approval. And so you may choose to look at the local field, and if it's not visible, you may need to add it to your column so that you can see that. But that would be the real difference between these two. In many cases, it's not, well, here's a couple examples here where you see where the new values are numbers, but the actual user, what you see are these values. So that would be an important thing to pay attention to. This is what the changelog looks like in 2016. So if you're in a version that's earlier than 2016, go ahead up here and search for changelog, and you're going to be looking for this. So if it's available, then you can do it in earlier versions as well, and the concept is going to be very similar. On that note, I'm going to move over to our demo. And so this is Business Central. So I've gone ahead and I've bookmarked mine up here at the top. And you can do that as well, but it's easy enough to changelog. You'll see the setup and you'll see the entries, and you'll see that both of mine are actually bookmarked, which has them appear on your role center. If we go to setup, you can see that in my demo database, I have it activated. If I go to setup and tables, you'll see the screen that we just saw on the slide. And so these are all the tables. And so some of the trick is getting to know which table you need and what fields you want to track. And we'll get into that here in a little bit. I'm going to reverse sort these because, come on, work for me here. And this is the screenshot that you also have seen. So there's some fields, and you can log insert, modify, or deletion based on what's going to happen. For the most part, you're going to want to stay here. There's only key tables that you might want to know when somebody added something. Maybe it's a new contact, and somebody in sales just wants to know when contacts are created. There are other options that you can do for monitoring fields. We won't touch too much on that today because that goes into a whole nother area to look at. But to just get started, to how to figure out your best practices and what you're going to do to be able to set up your system. Let's just go into one of these. There's these little 3 ellipses here that's going to take you out to all the fields that are in the payment terms table. If you were to select all, you would get modified by, you would get activity on all of these lines, and they may not be what you're interested in knowing, whether or not it's coupled with Dataverse. But if there's information out there, it will track it whether or not there's changes. I mean, it'll change that you'll see changes, but you could ultimately track fields that you're not interested in looking at. You would simply put a check mark. You can do it. I can do the modification deletion all from one screen, so I don't have to open each one of these because they all take me really to the same place. I just put the check boxes for the fields that I actually want to track. The other component that we actually have is changelog entries. I apologize for that, if you can hear it. So this is the changelog. And there's a lot of different fields here, columns. Some of these things, there are this value here. If you notice, it doesn't say like customer number, or it doesn't say blocked field. This is like the value, and it's related to the actual table that is being tracked. And so sometimes it's a little difficult to, if you're going to search for a specific value, if somebody changed a value on something, you have to know what you're tracking over here and know what you need to search on. But for the most part, you could easily come over and create some views. Here I have some saved views. So I have this one here. I called it entry by day. And I put T in and it put in today. And so now I can see everything that happens on a given day. I can do a compound key where I might want to have what happened on a specific day for a specific table, for a specific field. There's a whole bunch of different ways, and depending on your business model, that you can decide what you need to do. If there's a table that you're very interested in, you may want to just have that table. But then it's easy enough to come in here and change this to a different table if you know the table number. 27. Let's check items, see if anything's changed on items. And nothing has changed on items. But this is one way that you can manage and trim that list down a little bit, because it does get a little bit overwhelming. And if you can imagine that there's a million rows in here and you're trying to find that needle in the haystack and you need to search on something and you've been accumulating this data for over a year and you don't have a retention policy and you haven't decided that you only need to keep changelog entries for say 6 months and you let it grow and grow, it's going to be more difficult to find what you're looking for. You're going to have unnecessary data and the resources themselves will slow down the rest of your system. And that's why it's very important to develop a practice and only track what's really important, that's value added, that actually makes your life easier, not just collecting data for the sake of collecting data, kind of as Trish had mentioned spoke to earlier. I'm going to jump over here real quick because this is now the NAV environment. So I know a lot of you aren't on BC yet. You might be thinking about going there, but you're wondering, hey, is this available in my version? So yes, it is. This is 2016. So anything between 2016 and Business Central, you have this in here. So if I come up here and I do changelog, and again, if you're somewhere before 2016, you can come up here and search. If you have that search functionality, and you'll see these out here. So if I go to the entries here, I'm going to see a very, very similar looking screen with a lot of the same columns, right? And I've created saved views, similar to what I did in Business Central. I also created a extra category down here on my nav so that I can put them there so they're not messy. I can actually easily get to them here, and I'm strictly working with my changelog. So this is one way that you could come in and create some an easier way to get to what's important to you. I want to talk a little bit about the data itself. If you are, I like to kind of put the data into different categories. You have your setup tables, which is when you first come into either NAV or Business Central, we have a bunch of setup tables, and those setup tables should not change unless you expect them to. If Barbara could spell, we'd get a better result. There we go. So this is the setup table. And so you might want to know if somebody changes something in here, it's liable to break your system, right? So it's not going to change every day, so you're not going to accumulate a bunch of transactions over time. But if something were to change, you might want to know what the previous value was. So this would be a table where I would choose more fields, especially based on what my setups are. Because if somebody ever got out here accidentally, because let's face it, some systems, all users are super users, and sometimes they get into places that they don't intend to be, and they might make a change. Well, instead of it shutting down your business, you could go to the change log and identify whether or not something has been changed, what the old value is, what it should have been, change it back, and then you're back in business. But you won't tie up a lot of resources in the setup. I still wouldn't do all fields, and I'll show you why in a little bit. I have a secret. The other thing that we talk about is like customer records. So if you have a customer record here, I'll go into the customers. We'll just pick one here. If you're wanting to track something on the customer card and you're trying to set something up in the change log, but you don't know what table this is, you don't know what you should be tracking, you can tell here that there's a lot of fields on the customer card. There's fields that aren't even showing on the customer card. You may or may not want to track all of these fields. So by selecting all, it's going to track changes that you may or may not want to. If they change and you don't really care, you don't want to necessarily track those. There's a page inspection. Some of you may be familiar with it. Shortcut on the keyboard is Control-Alt F1. It's going to give you a page inspection. This works in NAV also. You also have the blue box up in the corner, and you have the About This page where you can get to this information as well. This will show you all of the tables that are available in here and what the value is. But if you hit all, select all, you can see that you'd be tracking a lot of information that really isn't important. It's just clutter. Up here, it's going to tell you what page this is. And here it's going to tell you what table. It's table 18. So if I go back to my change log, I go to my setup, and I go to my tables. Now I can go search for table 18, and I can get straight to my customer. I'm not tracking anything right now, but maybe if I wanted to, I would go to this little button over here. Now these are all the fields that I can track. Just look at them all. But maybe I only really want to know, did somebody change this customer's name? Because that might be a thing where if a company gets bought out and somebody changes a company name and you gave them a $5,000 credit limit, well, maybe you might want to know that it's under new ownership. Maybe accounting would say, hey, wait a minute, we need a new credit report. We need to do some assessment on this. Maybe credit is one that you want to check. So you could then select those here. Come on. And now we'll be tracking those fields, and you'll be able to see here that some fields have been selected. So that would be a master record. You also have records that are part of, let's restart my session, that's okay. You have documents. So this particular customer has some open orders and some blanket orders. These are all documents and they're repeat. Come on. They're a repeat of their orders over time. That's what we want for customers. We want to have repeat orders. Within those orders, you have a lot of detail. So you're going to get a lot more activity on a customer based on the number of orders, invoices, those types of documents. So if you're tracking those, now you're going to increase the amount of lines that are going to be written to your change log. And that's where, and that would be another place that you want to be very careful of. This is what can kind of clutter things up. You might want to know on a sales order. You can, if you're not using archives, where you can look at an order that has been changed and you're tracking it through the change log, you want to definitely limit the fields that are important to you in this particular scenario. Other things that we have are the subledgers. That's a different type of data. The subledgers, when you're posting, anytime you post something, it's going to hit a subledger. Those entries tend not to change. So to track those, there's no real need because you can't go in and just change a vendor ledger entry. And so it wouldn't really be beneficial to change those. There is one scenario that would be beneficial to track something in a ledger entry, and that would be on the vendor ledger entry. You can't go in here and just change these lines, so it's not worth tracking those. But on the vendor ledger entry, let's go find us some vendors. Oop, wrong button. Come on back. Got a little ahead of myself. Let's go to this one. So on the vendor ledger entry, this is one place that you're actually allowed to change two fields on the vendor ledger entry line, and that would be your 1099. So this might be something that's important for you, or would be interesting to you to know if somebody changed the information on here. The reason that they do this is if you're set up for 1099s and you forgot to put it on the default, or you set it midstream and there were some transactions for this particular vendor, you would want to go back and change these so that when you run your 1099 at the end of the year that you can have accurate data. But that might be one that you need to know that you would want to track, because normally this type of data doesn't change. So those two fields could be important to you. Let's see. So I'm gonna think about. We talked about where to find table information. Talked about managing the list. I'm just going through my notes here to make sure I cover everything. The other thing that I wanted to share with you, we talked about the saved views for both Business Central and for NAV. One of the things you can do, and if there's any Power BI users out there, you're going to love this. You can bring this change log into Power BI. And so for this, this is one that we've created. It is available for sale, but I can tell you what, if you're familiar with how to build Power BI, you can build this yourself. I will give you the tools to do it yourself. But what we've done here is we've created a change log where we have some fields in setup. And this is where with all fields, the way that it is stored in Business Central and NAV, they don't show up on this report. But you don't want to do that anyways, because it's really not a good business practice. And so for the sum fields, you can see that I'm tracking 28 fields. I'm tracking modification for 28 fields. I'm tracking insertion for 15. I'm tracking deleted for 28. But here's what's interesting. Do you notice this here? There are almost 3,000 tables in Business Central that you could track data on. And with that, you have over 60,000 fields that you could track. That's a lot of stuff to process. And you really, if you start turning on checking all fields, this is why you get into that resource problem by not taking the time to say, what is it I really need to look at? And so this tool helps you kind of see that pretty clearly. If I were to come over here, okay, so I can just look at the ones that are true, and then it'll show which other ones are true in here, but it's actually just showing me the modification one. I can look at just what I'm tracking for deletions. If this report also helps with trying to figure out what you might want to track, right? So if you don't know, you want to track a blocked field. Watch this. This is interesting. Check this out. These are all of the different names for blocked within Business Central. And NAV will have a similar amount. They'll probably have less because with each version, they add more, and as they're growing, they kind of change the table. So NAV, you probably have a few less. NAV users, you have a few less, but still it's a lot. And so this one for blocked, if I were just pick blocked, right? I'm gonna hit blocked here. So what this tells me is I have a field name blocked in 63 different tables. 63 different tables have a field blocked. And that's one that people like to know, well, who changed that? Who blocked it? Who unblocked it, right? Because we can't do that permission level security to say you can't use that. So we might want to know who's doing it. Maybe it's a training thing. Maybe somebody didn't know and they accidentally clicked on it, because, right, it saves as you go along. So this very well could be just an accident, and it just requires having a training experience with somebody, training conversation with somebody who may have made the change. But the fact that there's 63 tables, if you're trying to figure out what's blocked, instead of trying to figure those out from the front end and going from page to page to try to figure them out, you can come right here. I've got this sorted by table number, but you can see general ledger account, customer, vendor, items. This will, by doing this simple report, you can literally have your Business Central on another screen, plug in that number, and then go choose the field that you want to block or that you want to track. This is very, very helpful tool. Makes things a whole lot easier. And you can see that I'm moving around pretty quickly. Over here, if I wanted to hit the payment terms, I can see what's going on in that table, and there's nothing going on in that table right now. I'm not tracking anything. I thought it was, but that's okay. So now this other page that I have here is the actual monitor itself. So this is the one that if you, whether you use Power BI Desktop, which is free, you just kind of connect it to your data, and then you refresh it when you want to. So if you have 1 or 2 users, this might be the option for you. If you need to get it into service because quality needs to look at certain things and accounting needs to look at certain things, production might want to look at certain things, item management, they can all have their own version and they can save whatever views that they want here. But this one will tell you if I want to know what Barbara's been up to, I can just go check and see what she's been doing. If I want to know what's happened in the past 7 days, then I can see what's happened in the past, X number of days. This is called a relative date slicer. If you've not used this, this is really cool. So you can weeks, months, but ideally, if you're going to be monitoring this, maybe you can't get to it every day. Maybe you're going to do it every Friday. Whatever your protocol is, whatever works for your business model, then you can use it in many different ways. This will tell you, I'm going to clear, I've got a filter here, I'm going to clear this filter out. This little box over here is going to tell you how many entries you have in your change log. And you might set some parameters that you don't want it to go over 1 million. Okay, so when that number starts getting close, then you need to go out and look at your data retention policy, or maybe you need to do some cleanup on your change log. But it's going to give you an indicator right here with where you're at. And based on what you track, you're going to quickly learn where your number is, and you're going to know, you'll be able to see a range. It could be able to create a range for what's going to work best in your business model. And down here, this graph will show you how many, based on what you're tracking and what people are doing, how many changes have been made based on what you're tracking. And so on that note, I believe I'm going to put it back over to Trish and see if anybody has any questions. I believe I've covered everything that I want to.
Sure, absolutely. We do have a couple questions. The first one is, did I misunderstand the Power BI report, or should the report header say tables with all fields selected will not appear on this report?
Oh, thanks. You are correct.
All right, gold star for you, Noreen. And Barbara, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this next question. I have someone checking on it if you don't, but I remember any changes made via Rapid Start are not recorded in the change log. Is that still true in NAV 2018 forward?
I believe that is true.
I think it's true too. I have our support team just doing a check for us. So
yep. I'm pretty sure that is true.
Okay, great. So
I used to upload price changes all the time in NAV 2016, and they were never hit on my change log.
Perfect. Okay, great. So if that's untrue, we'll get back to you, but Barbara and I both agree that we believe it's true. So are there any other questions from the group today? Another one. When I query the change log, it tends to lock the table. Does it do that with Power BI? Question mark.
I don't believe that it does, and a lot of that will come from depending on the number of entries that you actually have and how big your change log table is. If people are trying to write to it when you're trying to refresh the data set, you could run into some troubles. if you're only going to refresh, if you were to use BI service, the service tends to be a little bit more friendly because you can schedule that to happen outside of normal business hours. So depending on how much data you have in there and how frequently you choose to refresh.
Thank you. And then just a comment, thank you. I noted a couple things to check or set up, like turning this mostly off in our test environment except for setup. And one thing Barbara kind of mentioned earlier was, you know, if everyone's a super user in your system, there's certain things you might want to track. I would also say a best practice is everyone should definitely not be a super user. So make sure that that'll be less you have to track if you, but unfortunately we do see that a little too often, but.
And we did do a different webinar on that one on how to move away from a super user, but not make it into a Fort Knox situation. And part of that is setting up your permissions, but also using the change log and custom profiles to create a nice blend of tracking, of keeping your system under wraps without making it so difficult to maintain that nobody wants to.
Yeah, that's out there in the recording. So. All right, if there are no other questions, you know, you can always feel free to email Barbara or myself offline if you think of something later, or reach out to your customer engagement specialist. They'd be happy to help you. We do appreciate everyone's time today. Barbara, do you have a couple extra slides for us to?
Actually, I do, but I need to apologize, and I need to jump back over to the Power BI report for a moment, because
Sure.
I promised everybody to know what this is made up of. So actually, I'm going to, if you're BI user and you are already set up using like web services for your pages and to do your reports, you can easily, oh, click the wrong button. Let's see. You can easily, I'll show you where I got this going. If you're not already set up to do to access web services with Power BI report, which if you're on-prem and you're using service, sometimes it involves a gateway and a NAV instance. And if you need help with that, that's fine, we can do that. But for this purpose, to get you going, if you're already partway there, these three tables right here, these pages. So if you were to set up page 595 is your change log entries, 594 is your field setup, and then the other one I use is the 8700 for the table information. These are the three that, apologize for that. These are the three that that I used for this report. And so you'll see them over here. And I didn't do anything special to them, but bring them in. May have created a relationship or two. This one was just for server refresh that I like to kind of put out there. But and then you can build your own. It's a simple table. These are cards. These are slicers. There's a relationship for the table because the one the field has a table number, but it doesn't have a table name. So I brought in the table information so I could get the table name, because most people can search for those and have a better luck finding those. But this is it. So if you're familiar with it, you can create those web service pages, connect them into BI, and build your own report. If you're not familiar at all with how to do a BI report, and you go, gosh, I'd love to have that report, but I really just I don't know how to build it, we can help you with that too. This is actually for sale if anybody wants it, and we'll hook it up to your system, and you'll be good to go there. If you are a NAV user, the table information is called table objects, and it is page 669. So instead of table 8700 that Business Central users would use, if you're on NAV or possibly BC on-prem, table object 669 will give you the information to pull in the table name and go from there. So on that note, good. I'm done. I'm glad I didn't forget that. I totally wanted to share that with you for anybody out there who loves BI as much as I do.
I'm glad. Thank you for sharing that. And Noreen, we did follow up with the support team, and that is still true that changes made via rapid start are not recorded in changelog. So glad Barbara and I were both right. So just a couple of quick updates. Please make sure you're checking out our website, inovia.com/workshops. That's where we have our different training sessions that are like 3 to 4 hours long. Those are paid sessions, but you pay one price and as many people from your company can attend as possible. I know there's a few great ones coming up, so be sure to check those out. And then we have a lot of free webinars like this one. So inovia.com/events, when you see the webinars, those are no charge to attend. A best practice is if you're interested in a topic and you're not able to attend, just go ahead and register and we will email out the recording for you. Also, we have a fun podcast. Jeff Pergalski and Steve Waltz, the two of them are a lot of fun together. So if you haven't heard it yet, be sure to download it. You never know what they're going to talk about. It's there.
They are
two together are trouble. They're a lot of fun. So they'll always talk about what's new in the industry and the dynamic space. Sometimes they'll introduce new team members, whatever the topic might be. But it's a lot of fun, so be sure to check it out. And then lastly, if you are not registered yet, the Inovia Customer Conference is coming up May 21st and 22nd in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is a great time to meet other customers of ours, to meet a lot of our team. There's no charge to attend the conference, and we also cover your hotel room. So just for the cost of a flight, you can come out and join us. That's also on our website as well, or you can reach out to your customer engagement specialist and they'd be happy to share the information. So thanks everybody for attending today. Barbara, thanks for taking the time to walk through that. And everyone have a great day.
Yeah, thank you, Trish. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope you got a lot out of it. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us later.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.